One, two, okay. Okay. Good evening. Thank you for coming to the Loops of Matter, the ninth encounter. This is getting serious now. Um, Tonight is a special night because we have kind of two events intertwined between each other. So tonight closed was the last day of the exhibition between Mercury and Mars. It's home. Vesna Grain's exhibition. Today we launched a catalog. The exhibition was curated amazingly by Adelina Greza, who we all know. And something special in this exhibition was because there is an interview inside the catalog between Mr. Christian Kerez and Mr. Grainsa. So I invite you to take the catalog, and it's a very interesting talk inside there about the artist and about the work process and architecture. So before we continue, I would like to invite Martin to make an introduction to for Mr. Christian Kerr. Okay.
Thank you. Good evening to all of you. I see that there's still a couple of seats in the back here, but even if you're standing, I think this will be well worth it. So thank you again all for joining us for tonight's session of Rhythms of Matter. During this series, we've had the pleasure of meeting remarkable architects from around the world and hearing not only about their projects and their work, but about the ideas, convictions, and questions that shape the way that they work. Each conversation has offered a different way of looking at architecture, what it can be, what it can resist, and what it can make possible. Tonight, we're very honored to welcome Christian Kerez. Christian Kerez is an architect whose work has had a profound impact on contemporary architectural culture. Originally based in Zurich, and now he's joined us full-time in Tirana, he has developed a body of work known for its rigor, its intensity, and its precision. An architecture in which structure, material, and space are brought into an unusually direct and powerful relationship. What is especially striking about his work is that it does not begin with spectacle or easy formal gestures. It begins with questions, and with the discipline to pursue those questions until reaching a clear architectural consequence. In that sense, his work feels less like the production of form and more like a search for what is fundamental and what is necessary in architecture. Alongside these practices, Christian has also played an important role in architectural education, influencing generations of architects at the ETH Zurich, not only through teaching, but through his work that constantly pushes the discipline to confront its essentials. Those buildings, but revisiting the design process itself. This evening, we'll be very glad to have a chance in a few moments to hear more about his work, his process, and the questions that continue to drive his thinking, and perhaps also to reflect on what his way of practicing architecture might mean in places like Albania, where change is fast, pressure is high, and the stakes of building well never been higher. So please join me in giving a very warm round of applause to Christian Kerez. Christian, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks for the invitation. Um, yeah, I discussed with Besnik, what to talk about, and he said, don't do the same mistake as all the other architects. Don't talk about your architecture. It's so boring. And then I told him, listen, Besnik, I will not do here a personality show, right? It's about architecture, nothing else. And then I have to admit I had a second thought, and I actually was thinking about the discussion I had long time ago with an art historian, and he told me that the difference between minimal art and land art which nearly happened at the same time, more or less in the same location, New York. The difference between these two expressions of visual art is that the one guys, they went to the movies that were showing westerns, and they did land art, and the other guys, they went to watch science fiction movies, and what they did later on was called minimal art. I don't know if it's true, right? But it's a nice story, so I thought, yeah, maybe there is something to this theory, and he would continue and insist and say, and I'm so convinced that all the movies you're watching, basically I watch every night one movie. All the movies that you're watching, they have a direct impact on your architecture. And I said, of course not. And to prove it, I collected all the movies that I would watch for half a year. So this is 2 pages of this list. This is the continuation. And I just brought, by the end of the week, always the DVDs I was watching, put it on the table, and the intern would write down the movie director and the movie title. As you can see, there are also some spelling mistakes. Doesn't matter so much, right? The question is, does this relate to architecture? Especially if you, basically watch everything, no matter old or new, good or bad. And this is the movie collection I have. I think it's something like 2,000 or 3,000 titles. Of course, I watched much more, but this is just the one that I think probably I watched them again and again and again. How does this relate to architecture? Currently, I'm working on a book that is called Space Ontology. And one part of the book is about the question, how can you imagine a space? Not draw it, not make models, but just your imagination in the most basic ways. And these are all the, let's say, possible ways how I thought one could imagine a space. And there are 42 ways. Probably there are more, but would need more time to find out. So what I try to say is I am interested, as Margaret also said at the beginning, in the basics in architecture. I think there are many different basics, right? It's not just one thing. And what interests me and attracts me is all these different ways how you can approach, imagine architecture. And I didn't start by doing architecture. I started by looking at architecture. I was kind of paid not to do something, but just to look at something. I started as a photographer, and I did some, let's say, publications on power plants, um, and this was the first book ever published, and actually the first work I did was a book. So I got also plenty of commissions, and I actually also made a living from taking pictures and then spend it on competitions that I would lose, like any good young architect is supposed to do. And out of that, later on, when I was teaching, I made a whole series, because as an architect, you are not doing architecture, right? You're doing everything else, either just talking, as I am doing now, or you are drawing, you're making models, but you are not building with your own hands, right? It's always a question of mediation. It's a question of which media you use in which purpose, and how does this other expression kind of translate architecture. Um, I gave lectures on literature, basically kind of talking about all these writers that had a huge impact on me. I have no idea if they had any impact on terms of architecture, but on me personally, and on painting, um, talking about different painters I met and somehow sometimes collected a bit, like Helmut Federley that you see here in this workshop. And the question, you know, which interests me also in architecture is what is architecture in its real essence, right? If you look at this picture, you might think, oh, it's Le Corbusier, Longchamp, but it's not, right? If you have a second look, you will notice this is a Chinese copy of Longchamp. It's not the best possible copy. If you look at the windows, how the door is done, not talking about the landscape design, but just, you know, so is this now Le Corbusier or is it not? If you ever visit the Barcelona pavilion, it's also quite a bad copy, but most people accept it as the original. So another, let's say, series of lectures I did was on architecture, but in my sense, in my understanding, um, uh, they're individual works, right? And these individual works don't represent the individuality of the author, but they just are a group of work in itself, right? So I would never talk about the private life or, let's say, political background or art history of the times of John Lautner or Villanueva Artigas or one of these many other architects, but just about the individuality of the work itself. Another series of lecture was about Japan, Japanese architecture. I was very much fascinated with China, with, you know, no, sorry, Japan, with manga culture a long time ago, with the movies, and of course also the architects. And but it's let's say the lecture was not about Japan, right? I'm not Japanese, as you can easily see. But it was about, you know, this kind of strange shift between modernism and Japanese culture. So on the left-hand side, you see the building by Bruno Taut, who was living the last years of his life in Japan and built nearly only this refurbishment. On the right-hand side, you see a building by Anthony Raymond, originally from Czech Republic, emigrated to the USA, came back, came down to Japan, had a very influential office, and Le Corbusier published this house that you see here on the right side in his oeuvre complet, saying to this Japanese architect, Anthony Raymond, you don't have to be ashamed to copy me. At least you copy from the right person, or whatever he meant by that. But let's say the interest is not what was never Japan. It was, you know, the shift of perspectives. Um, and this brings me directly, let's say, to this question, you know, what does it mean to live somewhere, to build somewhere, and what does it mean to change location, to go somewhere else, and what happens from one place to another place. So I would like to start, where I started in Switzerland, obviously. And maybe this building is not so Swiss in the sense what it's what kind of desire is standing behind this building, right? Because it's all open. Each, let's say, room is part of one level. Everything goes to the outside. Everything is public. So when I showed this project in Ticino, they told me, "Oh, you're so South American. We can tell that you were born in Venezuela." So in this region, it was not at all Swiss, but of course there is something that is very Swiss about it, and that's the way how it's built, how it's thought. It's not just a picture, right? It's what you saw before goes back to what is the program, the brief of the school, and how is it built, and this matters. This is the load bearing structure. This is how this different trusses would be assembled on site. As you can see here during the construction process, um, each element actually has a different profile. It's not from the catalog, but it's all customized. Um, if you look closer at the truss, you see how differentiated these metal pieces are. And how they were assembled, if you look closer, is quite complex. This is one knot where not only, let's say, different trusses meet, but also where the inside and the outside meet. These knots are insulated and gives it a complexity that goes far beyond everything that you otherwise would see in prefabrication, steel structuring. These are the drawings. And everything was integrated in the ceiling. So the overview plans for the MEP were so complicated that we had to do it ourselves because the MEP engineer said it's so complicated, I'm not paid enough to do that, so you have to do that yourself. And let's say this, let's say this affection or this striving, this proving the limits that everything in the building has a meaning, and it's all meant to express the conceptual thought at the beginning. It's all meant to express the desire to create an open, generous space that connects all these different levels, unifies them to one single passage that in the end is this big gymnastic hall. That was, let's say, one of the first buildings, now one of the next buildings made in Bahrain. We had a commission for parking lots that were part of a Girl Path project. And the basic idea was not just, to have a parking for pure efficiency, but also, let's say, for the purpose of enjoying the ride up and down, enjoying the beauty of the structure. And as you can see, it's not a surreal structure, but it's really functioning. If you observe closely this little car in the middle, you see that all these slabs are melting into each other. The space is constantly changing from one level to the other, but in a totally continuous way, so that the ride in this car park becomes experience. And this is now a reality check, right? You see the same movement of the car that is going up. And if you imagine you are sitting in this car, you can imagine how this space constantly transforms and changes from being exposed to the outside to being exposed to the inside, from convex to concave, from narrow to high, and so on. Not that difficult, right, to imagine to drive up and down. However, some Swiss journalists still don't understand how this parking works. Um, and of course, it was the question: how can you build that? You know that these slabs are like one continuous surface. So we took the nastiest, the most difficult part, and we built it ourselves in the office. That was built in Berlin. Then we tried out the scaffolding towers. How much inclination can we just achieve with this, so that only a very small part has to be customized in terms of geometry. And we also checked what kind of scaffolding systems does the general constructor construction company has, right? How can we use that to apply it to this to generate this form? And these were plans that were all together 14,000 of these 1 to 20 sections that were mandatory to have this very precise geometry, which is never horizontal. So just some pictures of parking. That was just the introduction to, let's say, the thing that was already announced, right, made in Albania. Um, I maybe start with two projects and then I focus a bit more. I would like to start with a project for seaside resort in Dengi. These are pictures from Dengi. Um, and what is quite obvious is let's say it's a space that it's a place that lives during the holiday summertime, where it's totally crowded. Otherwise, it's rather like a ghost town in winter, so not so many people there. And in summertime, everyone wants to basically sit outside, in front of the apartment, have fresh air, a view. And we thought it's actually a pity that, all these balconies are exactly the same, and there's so many different personalities living behind these facades that have different desires, different expectations. So we thought maybe it would be interesting to imagine all these different people and design specific balconies that are all different from one another. And to create through that also a different kind of perception of this communal housing or this apartment block that is much more vibrant and more difficult to capture. Um, and let's say the project itself was, conceptually designed more or less in the car ride from Beijing to Stuttgart, but then the consequences out of that are much more, let's say, revealing or interesting. And also, if you imagine the perspective from the ground floor, right, from the ground, then you will see this building from underneath. So the model 133 we have now in the office is elevated so that you can always see from underneath, like the real perspective, from a visitor, from a pedestrian walking by this building. So all the apartments maybe are the same, maybe not. We don't have that much impact on that. But they start to totally become different in front of the building, and we are now preparing the detailed execution drawings, where basically every brick is designed and not just the form, because we would like this building to remain gold, that you see also the effort from all these people working on these enormous volumes. And the people on site, they will get quite basic information, as you can see in these execution drawings. But we will also describe how to do the joints. We imagine that they will be quite raw, but all will be painted white so that it's uniform, but still you can feel the effort that was done to create this building. And at the moment, we started to make first mock-ups in the courtyard of the office. Another thing that attracts me a lot in Tirana is the scale, right? And there is this procedure that is like a fast drive urbanism, that you do a project and it's a house, but it's so big that it's also part of the city, right? It's also let's say, field of architecture where urbanism and architecture cannot be separated anymore. And this is exactly what I think anyway should be evident, right? I mean, normally in Europe, you have first the commission, then they make some test planning, and then they launch a competition for a master plan, then you have a jury, they pick somehow, or maybe also somehow in a different way, project, and then every architect is the slave to this master plan and has to follow it. And I know from many architects that won a master plan and hated themselves when they started to work as an architect on their own master plan. So this cannot happen here, right? It's one thing. You cannot separate the two anymore. Um, Edirama said it has a lot of freedom. I would say it goes with a lot of responsibility, right? That you have more freedom means also that you have much more responsibility. Because as an architect, you can in Europe just hide and say, well, I also don't like this volume, but I had to do it because there was the master plan dictating me what to do, right? And here you cannot hide between any previous planning. This is close by housing project, and as you can see, the spacing between the houses is something like a leftover. And we thought, what is if this space that is so big, that is so enormous, this is the project, and we just frame it, we just capture it, we don't invent the object that is standing on it, but we just protect the generosity, the openness of this space. And we relate it to the view, to the landscape, to the mountains which are close by, to the lake, which is also there at the entrance to Škodra. And this just illustrates the scale of this plot, right? 170 by 70 meters in comparison to the Titanic. But we think of it much more of a space, right? Not as an object like the Titanic, but much more like cathedral or a mosque, that has also similar dimensions as you can see here in comparison to San Giovanni in Laterano. These are different studies. How can you create a space that it's not one and just boring, but like a sequence of spaces constantly changing, but also being in the end one singular gesture. So I think with a kind of simple animation, you can imagine the sequence how the first skylight is very narrow, compressed, and then it opens to a wide courtyard in the middle, and then at the end, to the side towards the city center of Shkodra comes a last final um, opening to the sky, so that you have like a transition between different spaces. Each apartment would have both views, right, to the collective space, but also towards the outside. This is now a rendering. I don't believe so much in renderings, I have to say. It's that maybe to sell a project, it's okay, but I always wonder how will it be if it's built to stand inside this space, right? And also, if you work with models, the problem is how can you imagine to be inside this space, right? If the model is big enough, so we did also 1 to 33 model, then you can really sit, lie inside this space, and you can really imagine it. We also work a lot with VR glasses. We cannot distribute VR glasses, unfortunately. But what is possible that you take this code with your mobile phone, and if you have registered this code, you can turn your mobile phone in different directions. Then you see the space in front of you, behind you, to the left, to the right, on top of you, from all different angles. And I would like to come closer to where we are now, right? Made in Tirana. By kind of coincidence or destiny, I don't know if there's much difference between the two. Um, uh, we happen to have 3 plots quite close to each other in the same area of Tirana. These are the 3 plots, and they are different in every possible term, right? They have a different outline, they have a different surface, they have a different location. So, as a consequence of that, of course, all the projects are also different one from another, right? I heard some previous architects giving a lecture here talking about, yeah, here in Tirana, it's like a collection of architecture. I would strongly disagree to this term, right? I think it's about variety, and I think also this variety should and must exist between the different projects of one single architect or of one single architectural office. And what is interesting, if you now look in terms of what does it mean to the city, right? This will create something that no master plan could ever create, right? A form of differentiation, a form of variety, a form of orientation that hardly any other city will have, right? These are, we now focus on our project. I know there are many others to come, Um, I will like to try to explain also why they are so different from one another. What is, let's say, the trigger behind them. So one part is occupied by these small houses. And in the neighborhood, you of course have another scale of housing projects. But actually, we thought maybe we cannot just relate to this, right? But we also should respect these small houses and that they can still survive in this new environment. We just make them a little bit bigger. So the volume that is, let's say, frontal keeps the scale of these housing blocks, but then we put a large roof on it um, that it also gets another, let's say, scale without being another high rise, right? It's something kind of rather ambivalent, what exactly is that? And what interested us a lot, if you look at the facade of the building on the right and on the left hand side, and then you look at the house in the middle, you see, is this the same thing or is it a different scale? Um, it has, let's say, organization of the facade that is a large scale organization that goes over several levels, and through that creates a different notion of scale. This is also why we call it Little Big House. Um, um, I always wanted to do a high-rise building, right? My wife told me this is, the dream of every boy. Um, but I also gave lectures. I was really kind of also theoretically, let's say, working on what is a high-rise building, but as you all know, this Empire State Building from far away, it looks enormous, great, right? But if you're close by, you hardly miss it, right? It doesn't look like anything special. The same disappointment with the Chrysler Building, right? From far away, enormous impression, but what a disappointment if you stand just in front of it. So what we thought is, unfortunately, we didn't get a commission for 300 meters or 700 meters, just 100 meters. But we maybe can do something that the perspective is like going to a monumental movie. You sit in the first row, and it's not like sitting in the first row is the worst place that you can find. It's actually the movie looks much better, if you sit in the first row. Um, so it was this perspective, right? What could be a high-rise building, not from far away, not about the silhouette, but what can it do for the people that are living close by, that are passing by every day, and having not the airplane perspective from a distance of 200 meters. Um, and and the idea that we came up with is pretty simple, right? If you change not just the dimension, but you change everything, the whole outline, the geometry of the outline, 3 times, like polygonal, triangle, circle, whatever. And then you have all the levels in between, transforming between these different shapes. You would get a form that would be sculptural, not from far distance, but from close by. Um, and that is now the actual design, and that also looks sculptural, let's say, from every side differently. So hopefully people will also walk around it and visit it. Um, experience different viewpoints. But let's say, maybe what is very crucial for this notion, right, of, let's say, this mesh of columns and slabs that are exposed in front of the building is the relationship between the dimension of the slab and the dimension of the column. If you zoom in this rendering, and of course you could say this informal quality of the building itself fits very well to this site, and it also breaks free from this given framework of all buildings around it. And it gives you a perspective that is constantly changing from close by, and that is, let's say, offering something that most let's say high-rise buildings in the United States that made it to history, cannot offer. And that is also, let's say, specific to the typology of a high-rise building, right? What is it to stand in front of it and just to look just up? And as you can see, these columns are quite elegant and quite small. They are just 45 centimeters. From close by, it would look like that. And when we came up with the first idea how to organize the core, because of the seismic impact, our engineer told us, actually, sorry, you will have to make columns of 100 centimeters. And we thought, maybe it's not so bad, maybe it would also nice. And then we tested it 1-to-1. And as you can see, it's an enormous difference, right? It's not abstract, it's physical, it would change the whole core. So we started with a core organization, as you can see it on the left-hand side. This, as a conclusion of that, we had columns of 100 centimeters. And then we changed the entire core design to what you see on the right-hand side, and the columns now they are what they should be from the start, 45 centimeters. And this now shows you all the different levels, right? You see each apartment is also slightly different. The structure constantly changes. But it's not a change that is, let's say, designed, right? It's a change that is just coming through the impact of the forces on the structural design. And thanks to this total change of the internal organization, we now can keep this image that we also understand as a promise, right? That was the presentation of KKT. And we also want to stick to this promise, right? And make it not just a rendering, but something that will be look exactly the same when it's built. The last project, this is our office in Tirana. It doesn't look every day like that. Actually, that was just at the opening day before all the people came. And they, for me, what is interesting, right? I started with what's the impact on European modernism on Japanese architecture? What's the impact of Japanese architecture on European modernism? So my focus point or my interest is not so much how will I change Albania, much more how will Albania change me. And of course, if I live here, this country has a totally different impact on my understanding also of architecture. And, and say for me, let's say international architect is not really so much of a label, but every country offers a possibility to change your own approach to design and to come up with new ideas. So the last design was, let's say, the only one that was done after the change to Tirana. And these are pictures taken in the neighborhood where we have the office, Rua Barricada. And I'm totally fascinated by these attached volumes that you find in this neighborhood. I think most of them are illegal. And what is interesting, right, it's not just attaching balconies, but even if there is already a balcony, it will immediately be converted into an expansion of the interior space, right? So it's not just an attachment like maybe in the first project of balconies, but really a volumetric extension. And then you see all these staircases that are open to the outside. And there are even some staircases that are entirely exposed, as on this example here. And that is just more or less 100 meters from where we work. It's quite beautiful, right? So, I mean, there's also, it's a kind of part of this country that it's very specific, and we thought maybe, you know, we can develop, or how to say, if I'm working here as a non-Albanian, it's much easier to imagine Albania, right? To fantasize Albania. And that is always the advantage, you know, if you work in another country like China or like Brazil, that you don't entirely understand this other country. So most of it is also kind of a fantasy about another country. So in this sense, it's not that we try to copy this project, or that we just do it again, or that we think in any nostalgic terms about this architecture. But it's a trigger point for conceptual thoughts about how people live. What is an apartment? How can you experience architecture in an apartment? Um, and so we were thinking, okay, what is if all the spaces that are difficult to change, kitchen, bathroom, toilet, you know, they are attached, while all the things that are easy to change, living room, bedroom, corridor, entrance, um, are just in a box that can be divided however. So each apartment is based on the same module, that is this box on the left-hand side, that can be transformed in different ways, so that you can also then find a reason for different attachments. But of course, also if these attachments are once built, you still can change the apartment however you want it. And this gives endless possibility, right? How an apartment could look like, how can it be experienced, how could it be organized. And this is now a section through this building that is on the one hand side super rational, super economical, you see always the same grid, the same slabs, but allows plenty of variety because these exterior elements, modules are constantly changing in position. Also, the fire escape stairs are on the outside of the facade, the elevators are on the outside. And we thought, that you don't have to walk too much to go to the common ground, to the park. We do these suspended skywalks, these steel trusses, so that it never needs more than 1.5 levels to go to the outside. And these, let's say, skywalks, they also differentiate between a space on the inside that is a communal space and the space in front of the building on the outside. And in this sense, it's not just, let's say, a concept of apartment typologies, but it's also creating a public space inside the city. And this is also the contribution in urbanistic sense towards the city. And all the apartments have cross ventilation. This shape also relates to the only access street that we had there. But of course, we also think of this as a principle that could also work in totally different areas of Tirana or Albania. By the way, my whole office is here. Can you stand up, guys? Thank you very much.
Christian, thanks so much for the presentation. And I think for sharing with us some very, let's say, eclectic insights into architecture that hopefully we'll get a chance to unravel through the next couple of questions I prepared for you, as well as the questions from the audience, which I'm sure will be much more unpredictable. So my first point is notice that going through the presentations and researching your work prior to this event, we see that your work is driven less by style and less by, let's say, the external image or appearance of the object or the project, rather than a search for something that's fundamental and essential to architecture itself, some kind of truth, so to speak. So I was curious, what has shaped that search for truth in architecture over time? What were, let's say, the inspirations or the moments of clarity that turned architecture for you to a form of investigation and research over and above simply just designing a building?
I don't, work so much with inspiration. I think the work comes much more from despair, you start a project, everything seems possible, total freedom, but then you get bored because everything is possible. So, why go to the left? Why go to the right? We also live in times where I would say it's not anymore fascinating, to explore individualistic total freedom, but I think it is much more driven by desire for evidence, why could something be justified, why could what could be the reason to make any possible decision, right? So I think that the work comes always starts so easily, totally innocent, and then comes always this question, so what, or what for, or why should I do it? Didn't I do it already? And didn't I know Olshati do it already, or didn't Milan Radic do it already, or and I think it's much more this kind of um, frustration that somehow everything is possible and everything is done, and then there is uh, let's say the desire to find something that maybe is just there, but nobody looks at it, or um, is not, let's say, in invention that is of a personal quality, but it's not. It's much more like finding evidence that somehow is hidden, and just wants to be uh, revealed, and could be revealed by everybody, not just by me.
Okay. I think as architects, when we first receive, let's say, especially as students, when we're lucky or unlucky enough to get one of these courses where we're free to do anything, sometimes that can be very suffocating in a way, because where do you start? And in a way, the more passionate and creative you are, the more difficult that becomes. But of course, we also need to find ways to kind of navigate and mediate this. And I was kind of curious. You've mentioned that in previous interviews that you're not only interested in design of buildings, but also designing the design process itself. Uh, so perhaps what tips or what have you learned with regard to this process of designing or framing the design process in such a way that it can reveal some kind of essential truths about architecture rather than simply a solution to a brief example.
If you think of architecture or architectural design as adventure, right? Then it's always the question how something new can happen, and I think that's only uh, possible um, if you don't fall into the trap of any possible automatism, right? And um, I I also, let's say, had the luck that I was never successful in the sense that I could run an office with 200 people or 500 or so. That is like a machinery that has to be feeded, right? Um, so I can, with small office, I have also constantly create or invent obstacles or detours or whatever it takes, to not just follow a pre defined design process.
So I think that reveals a really interesting paradox between what we see and perceive of your work, which is very structural, very rigorous, very precise, and the fact that you speak of the necessity for flexibility. in your own process, so to speak. Now, the work does appear very rational, but also the final result appears quite intuitive in the forms. Do you think that there is a particular moment in the architectural design process where the key idea emerges? Is it something that for you comes primarily from the constraints, or it comes from the intuition, and then you meet the constraints halfway across?
For me, most constraints are totally artificial. Many constraints are not credible. Like, oh, this is too expensive, and very often this is just prejudice and a convention. I think a project has to reveal its own logic, its own evidence, find its own way into existence. That cannot be predetermined, right? And on each project, you work differently. Each project has a different story. Sometimes, for example, Shenzhen, it was designed, I would say, in minutes as a concept, right? Not as a project. And Gate was like took a very long time, several months of constant redesigning. In the end, I don't want to, if I'm standing here giving a lecture, I try to explain the projects, right? But this comes at the very end. If I work on the project, I don't want to understand it. I just want to be driven by the project. I want to be obsessed by the project. I want that the project dominates me and not vice versa. Of course, giving a lecture is also a bit like being on a stage, doing a little performance. So I try to rationalize the project, but if I work on the project, I try to be irrational, and I try also not to control the project.
So I think the takeaway is that in retrospect, it's very easy to go in like a doctor and kind of diagnose its poetics, its structure, its material, its precision, its people, its context, its landscape. But at the end of the day, you really want to, correct me if I'm wrong, you really want to kind of keep yourself open to all of these different forms and dimensions that go into the design. Do you feel that from these particular, let's say, elements or dimensions of design, such as structure, landscape, photography, or even model making, do you feel that any of these is critical or crucial to the entirety of your design process, or is it more on a case by case basis?
It's for every project differently, right? But basically, we use all the tools we get. The tools are developing enormously. What is possible to do today, I could not even imagine when I started this profession. As you could see, the people working in my office are pretty young. It's because they are familiar with a technology that comes from a time that for a time from a new generation, right? But also people that are 10, 20 years older and not experienced as young people can be.
So I think in a way, we hire younger people, especially perhaps in the future, some of the young architects here in the room, that can be a time machine forward, some of us. And if we rely on the experience and the insights that some of the more experienced architects in the room have, that can be a time machine backwards. So in essence, ideally, you would want a mix of let's say, all different perspectives from all different timelines, time and space kind of fused. And I guess my last question, which perhaps now I have the honor of saying that you can have some very personal insights, is what you make of uh, designing architecture and designing the design process itself in Albania specifically. Now, as we know, Albania is kind of undergoing this very rapid boom where we have this mix of rapid high-rise development that's kind of being integrated into existing infrastructure. Sometimes it's effective, sometimes it's clashing. But at the end of the day, what particular, let's say, constraints or opportunities do you see as an architect practicing in Albania now, but also living?
Well, what looking for what we are trying to do is actually projects that have a meaning on every possible perspective. That are working with apartment typologies, having a different impact on the city, uh, and that it's not just urbanistic intervention or design idea or facade idea, but it's really also about um, what spaces can you offer with your buildings, how will it feel to be inside these buildings, how will it be to live inside these buildings, how will it be to spend there 5, 10, 20 years or longer, and that is and the perspective that interests me the most. With all the projects that we are building, we will get some apartments for ourselves. And for me, let's say designing is a super tough work, building even tougher. But the pleasure is to live inside the building, right? Very often you work for clients that you can never experience, what they experience. And I want to also live in these buildings that I design. That would be for me, let's say, the biggest reward, the biggest pleasure also after the tough work of the designing and building. And if it's possible, we could also open these apartments. That is something like Airbnb or so. That if somebody likes the building from outside, you can also rent an apartment for a day or I don't know how long. That they are also open. That it's not just an outside that we are designing, but it's also filled with interior life and that there's also a possibility of a public anticipation, or if somebody who has the desire or interest to experience. I always make the question in the office, how long would you come to Albania just to experience our own projects, how long would you stay in Shenzhen? How long would you like to stay in Gate of Skodra? And so far the answers are quite different, Some people think, okay, I can do it in 10 days. Others think, oh, I need 2 weeks. But let's say that the perspective that interests it's not, let's say, just to say, I have now an office here, I live here, I work here, Albania changed my life. But also, kind of, what will be the life after I build, and to to keep this proximity, and then of course the idea is it will be pure pleasure after the hard work.
Um, that's really awesome. I think maybe someone from the audience can later ask you how to keep get people to come to Albania and stay for much longer, as long as hopefully you get to stay here. Uh, Now, of course, from your answering the last question, I picked up on something that seems very simple, very intuitive, but perhaps we don't think of it too much because we think of them as clients ultimately, where we start the work, we finish the drawing to get paid, and then we move on with our lives. But you present to us a perspective of empathy, not only in time, how long would you be willing to stay in this particular place, but also in scale and space. What does it feel like using it from the outside? What does it feel like living in it? I think these are very important takeaways that, as architects, we need to be constantly reminded of. Now, for the young architects in the room, it's a lot to take in, and perhaps over days, or weeks, months, and years, they'll be able to integrate that into their own practice. Uh, but they're also kind of bombarded with other, let's say, signals and noises. On one end, there's AI. On the other end, there's these continuing kind of uh, sense of urgency and emergency when dealing with the climate, when dealing with displacement, when dealing with all of these issues that we face not only as architects but also as people living in kind of urban environments. As someone who has worked in education for a very long time, do you feel that there's anything in mind that you would like new and younger architects to keep in mind and to ideally never let go of, even beyond their studies?
Well, the question is, what would I do if I would be young, right? And first of all, I cannot choose, right? I cannot. I wish I could say, there's a time machine that changes my own time and age, and I would be young again. But the times when I was young were so different to the times that young people are nowadays young, right? It would be somehow ridiculous if I would try to teach anybody in such a totally different situation what to do, because it would just mean that would I also doubt that what I'm doing. I cannot be a role model anymore, or I cannot give advice, right? I would say whatever you can do has to come from the time that 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 we are living in now, right now, 2026, right? And it cannot come from a old guy sitting comfortably in a couch on a stage, um, being over 60, advising anything. I think this would be absurd. But I can also say I envy you for being young, and I think every time has its specific challenges and possibilities. And the question is, what are they, right? And and I think I should sit in the podium, and a young person should sit here and advise me, what to do now and what to do 2026, and explain me how much the time changed.
Okay, that's great. So I'm done with my questions, but maybe we can get some different voices from the audience who uh, might be able to give their own opinions or perspectives on what 2026 might mean as an architect, and then just kind of cross-reference it with you and see where that investigation might take place. So if anyone has any questions, not just young architects, of course, please feel free, and we can bring you a mic.
Hello, hi, I'm Neve. Nice to meet you. I'm very glad for this to be tonight in this presentation. I'm very glad. I really enjoyed a lot this presentation of this project. I saw some of this project, but presenting that is totally different. Then I want to thank Martin that he doesn't leave any question for us because he does all the questions. But I just I just see myself in a lot of your opinions and in a lot of the things that you said. And I really appreciate the sensibility that you have in every project, at least that you presented. First of all, from the parking, I think that now I understand why our Prime Minister fell in love with the parking offer, not only in the underground, because it is a really nice culture in the underground. Then I really appreciate the fact of having this sculpturing architecture that we're bringing here in Tirana too. Not only you, but all the this architectural movement that is now here in Tirana is bringing this very interesting perspective of the city. I have only uh, some doubts on this situation that I wanted to discuss with you, not to ask you because somehow you give an opinion about what's happening. Um, First of all, is this the globalization of that it's influencing architecture too. So you find one tower today in this block. This block doesn't work no more, so the tower pops up and goes in another block. It's like the same thing, the same tower, but in different blocks and in different cities, in different countries. Uh, what do you think about this fact that it's happening not only here in Albania, worldwide? And then I really appreciate your progress, that it was very visible. I now imagine you coming here in Albania and having the first project that you presented, Shenzhen, that you brought some of your artistic perspective, the sculpturing of the building in some detail. Uh, then, at the end, I really appreciate the fact that you really studied the way of living and you are offering different ways of living, even by architecturally speaking, even entering inside. So, in the beginning, I saw that you were from outside going inside. In the last project, I really appreciate that you were from inside, how people will live inside, and then how it looks the building outside. Um, and many times I have this question: what's happening? It's like sometimes you feel like you're not doing architecture, you're doing a good execution, you're doing a very beautiful building, but where's going this architecture, the combining of the good living, different way of living, influencing in a good living of every people and in a certain city, uh, how it is combined with this culturing and this very exhibitions architecture.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting moment to be here. A lot of things are happening, are changing. Um, it is a change that is enormous, right? And um, what will come out of it at the end? Um, I think there will come out a diversity of, let's say, expressions of architecture. Um, there is also, let's say, a desire to express something. There are different attempts to find this expression. Um, what I I'm fascinated is that here in Albania, architecture is a part of a political agenda. You know, it is somehow curated, it is desired. And what I experience nowadays in many countries in Europe is that architecture is kind of blamed for, you know, different reasons, different problems of our times, of our society, and we become uncomfortable expression of this. And here I have the feeling it's uh, an expression that is desired, you know, that is curated, that is consciously driven. I think this has enormous potential. In the end, what will we leave? You know, what will survive ourselves? I mean, the food we eat is done every day. The clothes we wear are rotten after some years. The cars we drive um, are ruined after a short time, right? The computers are already old-fashioned after 1 year and have to be reinstalled. And I think architecture is something of the reminiscences of our time and our culture. And I see a lot of, let's say, changes happening also throughout Europe. An enormous transformation process in terms of urbanism, architecture, but that is not desired, you know, that is haunted, that is hated, and I think here it's also happening, maybe in a higher speed, but that's not the main difference. The main difference, I would say, is that here also exists a certain desire and curiosity for that, right? And also your question was quite open. I think if I would give a lecture in Berlin or Paris showing 3 projects I would build there, I would be probably immediately under attack, you know. So this gives me a lot of hope, you know, that things will go well because there is also positive energy, you know, and that is maybe much more important than any question of what is the exact processing, what is the exact gender.
Hi, I'm Benjamin Reyes from Supervoid with Practice. Thanks for your beautiful lecture. I really enjoyed all the projects. Until we reached this one, we were pretty curious and skeptical to some parts of it. So I would like provocatively to ask you if you spoke about responsibility as a consequence of freedom, and then also you celebrate the fact that young architects should inform you, mature architects, about contemporary in the same way as a young or semi-young architect. I pretend from mature ones to be also wise enough on showing us some mistakes from the past. I was really fascinated on how you showed some architectures in order to measure the scale of the projects you were working on. Until we reached this one, in which I would like to ask you if this let's say, exaggeration of minor spontaneous architectonic elements to get into this very monumental, large scale for a residential horizontal building. And did we measure this building with some similar examples, especially from the 60s or 70s, in which, apart from the optimist in which they were built, in many cases they revealed as failures? Did you check or through which tools you are able to measure, for example, this very large, big scale residential building?
What was the question? What was the question exactly?
I mean, if there are, through which tools will you measure or verify or check, or through which already existing build projects you believe this could potentially host in 2026 an interesting way of living, this scale?
I think, uh, well, I am not sure if I understood the question, so I will maybe um, inform it. Question is, if I design something like this, is it, a monument to become famous, or what's the topic, or is it a revival of the 60s? I would say it's basically the desire that I would love to live there. And the reason I would love to live there is because in an apartment, to go from, for example, the living room to the kitchen, and you imagine the living room is 250 and the kitchen is 220. And the living room has openings to two sides, and the kitchen you can look on three different sides. Has just very small windows. The bathroom is like a capsule. We built a house in Salzburg where the sanitary rooms are also like attachments, and let's say, these daily movements from bedroom to the bathroom, from living room to the kitchen, if this is the experience, if this is an architectural experience, um, what else can you offer as an architect? And I would love to live there because I can constantly have this change of scales, of different perspectives, of different views. The apartments are actually quite modest in size, but how much they offer as a, let's say, um, also emotional experience, I think goes beyond any comparison. Any building I know, also from, including 60s and 70s, right? Um, I also am not sure if you're referring to, I know, the Capsule Tower or whatever. Let's say the ideal of having a program done with different volumes, could also be found in vernacular houses of the Middle Ages, right? You could also call the Dogon which were, by the way, also reference for our 60s architecture, as a form of articulating on a daily basis the walk from, let's say, the place with the fire where you cook to the place where you are together with the family and eat, to the bedroom. And this is a very also archaic experience of the daily life that I imagine very rich. And I also think the project can be super economically discussed it once in the office, right? And the developer became super excited and said, wow, this is a project I can do in 1 year. You know, if you look, imagine this grade, you know, what columns and slab, it would be super efficient, right? And these capsules, if you imagine how easily it was to do that legally for the general construction company, you know, much faster and efficient. So I think this is also it's radical, it's utopian, it's pragmatic, it's vernacular, all that at once, but most of all, a very nice place to live.
I would make the same question, but in a more direct way. I've seen a lot of really interesting things and thoughts and the commitment to architecture in this your conference. But we are talking about the specific building. The idea is beautiful. It's also original. But the scale of the building is reminding of failed experiment of the 60s. So the
Excuse
question,
me, this is the second time I would like to ask you to be more specific,
yes,
right?
I will be.
We already heard this long enough.
No, please. I will be really specific. That's why I'm doing the question again. So my question is, does it make more sense to the economy of your office and of your clients than to the quality of life of the inhabitants of the city?
I think I answered that already. I also don't see so much difference between the previous question. And you know that the 60s was one of the most productive periods in the history of architecture. It was also one of the most experimental, but also one of the most conventional periods. And there was a boom in architecture. So I think one has to really be precise, you know, what does it mean?
Hello. Um, Thank you for today. I really learned a lot. I'm a student of architecture. I also have a question about the latest project, not as an architect, but as a user, as an Albanian person living here, as an inhabitant. My question was, we are always taught that when we do projects, to think about the user. And when I think of myself as a user, I can't imagine myself in this building or my family or any of the people that I know that is Albania. I really appreciate, and it's my first time seeing a project or an office really try to understand Albanians, try to study them. And I could see that the office really tried. Sorry for honest and direct, as I would like to ask. But in terms of interior and the way how we live, look, I don't think any of us, sorry for speaking in the name of every person, but at least of every person that I know, would choose to live in such a module, let's say. It would be challenging. So I wanted to understand, did you really, did the office try really to understand? Because we are people that for centuries lived in a way that we appreciated interiors, also because of history, also because of communism. We didn't have the chance to beautify our exteriors. Therefore, interior has always been very important to us and the way we organize. And it's very hard, I believe, to change this mindset, the way how we live inside these places. And this sudden change can be a bit not easy acceptable.
I have to say I'm quite critical to starting point we Albanian and I as telling how all Albanians are. I have met many different Albanians. It's not a let's say uniform pattern of people. So I think I can totally respect that you would like to live there. You don't have to, right? There are still five other projects when you can make your personal choice. There are two other projects in absolute proximity, walking distance of 5 minutes. You can also live there if you're looking for a new apartment. But maybe anyway you are not doing that. Um, I also don't think that every building should be the same or every apartment should be the same because all the people are not the same, right? I mean, I cannot make an argument for that. Well, I also don't want to convince you of any other opinion. Okay, because you don't want to live, fine. Um, uh, and there, let's say, I'm a bit surprised because let's say the typologies inside are quite different, right? Um, and this building can be inhabited in many different ways. Maybe it's hard to imagine, right? Also with all these variations that are possible, but um, I think it's also nice if the city has different buildings with different spatial quality, with different typologies of apartments, with different experiences, right? Imagine you don't like to live there, but maybe if a friend of you would live there, maybe you will be curious, how is it, to really live there, right? And eventually, when you would visit this friend, you would also start liking it. Who knows?
So one more question, if possible, because I feel that the questions of the conversation are so interesting that they really need to be accompanied by a glass of wine.
I have a question.
It's just a small follow-up question for your answer. Since now we have carte blanche, as you said, and a lot of language can be developed in Albania architecturally, do you think there is any advice or any need to maintain coherence between all these different languages, or everything can work even with all this?
No, I think this is an important question, right? And I think there should be in the end also an identity created through all these different projects. Um, and I think this cultural identity is something that is developing, right? Also openly. Every competition here is on TV and can be watched and commented. I think that is it's really fascinating, right? Where will this country be in 10 years, right? I also wonder. But at least I can wonder, right? I can be in Europe in many different countries where I cannot wonder because I know already. And that is the most difficult thing. So I would say this openness and this open question mark, right? What it will mean, not just following this lecture and let's say these 6 projects, with all the different lectures, all the different projects, what is that all together, right? I think that's an open question I cannot answer, but at least it is an open question, right? And that's already, I think, amazing. And maybe that open question is also good for the open ending, for the open lecture.
Definitely. Christian, thanks so much for your time. A big round of applause for, let's say, getting us to re-see the context, perhaps a slightly different angle. And I'm sure that we'll have plenty more questions that you'd like to direct each other and Christian as well. And I invite you to the table in the back for refreshment or a glass of wine or maybe something. Thanks.